Emma tota sabelani, Emma tota sabelani, Emma tota mandani. Ay, Olengos, City Lengos. Emma tota sabelani, Emma tota sabelani. Abafazi bayalila, ay, Olengos, City Lengos, Olengos.
Good afternoon, good morning to some of us, and welcome to the second iteration of the African University's Gender Equality Forum, hosted by the Shared Value Africa Initiative and the It's Not Okay movement. Some of our speakers and audience were all part of the first one hosted on August the 12th, 2021, and a warm welcome back to all of you, and welcome to those that joined us for the first time. Please do tell us in the chat who you are and where you are joining us from, as it's always good to know who's in the room with us, or shall I say, who's on camera with us. So I guess we're all here today and we're saying why the second African University's Gender Equality Forum. Firstly, as the Shared Value Africa Initiative and the It's Not Okay movement, we believe that we as a collective can increase gender equality. And we as a collective, if we can increase gender equality, we can reduce gender-based violence. And reducing gender-based violence has escaped us, as we know, for thousands of years. Secondly, we want to motivate and inspire our academic institutions as a collective to unite and stand together and create solutions and policies that address gender equality for our students, research, and academic population. And I was just telling my colleagues earlier on this morning that I came across last night preparing for this and just thinking about today. I came across the March 2022 UNESCO Internal Institution for Higher Education. They published the Gender Equality, How Global Universities Are Performing report, revealing results that indicate the extent to which higher education institutions contribute to gender equality, looking at the students, at research, and at the academic population. There were 776 higher education institutions that participated from 87 countries. 49 of those institutions were from Africa. And the statistics were very concerning. However, female students outnumbered male students globally in 2019. 54% of the graduates were female. However, universities are far more focused, according to the research, on measuring women's access to higher education. So it's more important for them to see how many women register rather than tracking outcomes and success rate. And the presence of women in the student population does not translate, sadly, into the presence in the academia and university leadership positions. Less than 2/5 of senior academic professors, deans, chairs, and senior universities leaders, and less than 1/3 of authors in research papers are women, evidencing a significant gender gap. The report also shows that most universities claim they have various policies and services that support women progress. However, the share that could provide the relevant evidence was so low that it clearly demonstrated that many institutions are not transparent about the progress towards gender equality. There is some good news though, is that African universities are the most equal when it comes to the share of female students studying STEM, medicine, arts, humanities, and social science. And last night, while I was busy looking at all of this, I also wanted to laugh because I came across an article, and I quote, that said, "It is encouraging to note that 39 out of the top 200 global academic institutions, and that's 19.5%, are currently led by women. A 2% increase from 2019 when it was 17.5%. Really? We feel encouraged by that figure? That's only 1/5 of top universities that's led by women. So yes, we clearly have a lot of work to do, and that's why we're all here today. And to show that the Shared Value Africa Academy and the It's Not Okay movement believe in gender equality, I would now like to introduce you to our first male moderator and host for the day, Jackson Akor, who will lead the introduction and discussion with our panel and participants today. Jackson is a young lecturer from the African Leadership University in Rwanda, and Jackson's teaching and research interests cut across small, medium enterprises. And he looks at development with a bias in new venture management, social entrepreneurship, and women entrepreneurship. So Jackson, the floor, shall I say, or the screen is yours. And I just want to say to everybody here today, once again, welcome. And please feel free to voice your opinion on the chat. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Tiki. It's my pleasure to be your moderator today at the second edition of the African Universities Gender Equality Forum. And thanks for that warm introduction. I mean, it's interesting to see that we're on the path of progress, making a 2% increase from 2019 in terms of leadership positions led by women in universities. Everyone, please do well if you've not added into the chat box where you're dialing in from. We'll be so excited to know that we have people from all around the world. So just keep that conversation of where you're joining us from in the chat box. So really, today we are going to have a conversation, right? It's not that brick and mortar conversation, as it were. It's going to be very interactive, such that at the end of these 90 minutes, we'll leave here with action plans to accelerate gender equality in our respective spaces. So at the same time, we also seek to steer a conversation towards action that we as a collective can intentionally accomplish. So really, last year's event has been compiled into a 23-page report, very interesting report. I was looking at it before this session, and I will encourage you to check that report on the Shared Value Africa Initiative website. Lolo, if you can also share the link to that report, it would be nice so that participants know that at the end of this session, we don't just leave talking. I don't like talking and just going off the camera, right? You put that into a report that will inform action. So last year's report has been well compiled and is available in the public domain for all of us to read up. Really, if we work together to raise awareness through the conversation we'll have today and address the lack of gender equality and the lack of real support for gender-based violence victims, then we'll be able to shift the thinking, get institutions to look at changing policies to reduce GBV and prosecute perpetrators in various spaces. So a bit of housekeeping just before I go into what today looks like. Please use the chat box as much as you can, except for our speakers who at later time, they will be speaking. Stay muted wherever you are. This will enable us to make the best of this moment. Interestingly, today, I am not alone. I have a co-moderator who is also male. At a later time, I will introduce him. So together with my co-moderator that you'll be meeting soon, we'll be steering this conversation today. So a quick insight. If you are just joining us, prior to the beginning of the meeting, we had flashed the slides that had the overview of today's session. It had the speakers and all the likes. If you didn't see that, just to give you an insight, so we'll have two keynote speakers that will give us a state of the art around gender equality in their respective spaces and what we're really doing. Are we making progress? Are we on the path of progress? So two keynote speakers will share insight through their presentation. Then we'll quickly spin into question and answer session. And that is really where you have the opportunity to pop in your questions as well as comment in the chat box. So without wasting much time, because time is of the essence, I would like to introduce our keynote speakers. The first keynote speaker today is Linda Dlamini. Lindy, sorry, pardon me, please, Lindy, not Linda. Lindy has 25 years experience, right, in financial services, spanning the entire insurance industry, fund administration, as well as investment. She's currently the CEO of DBVF Response Fund 1, a private sector-led fund set up as part of the national response to gender-based violence and femicide in South Africa. She was part of last year's event, and Lindy will be taking us through a keynote titled, Are We Making Progress in the Fight Against GBV? And Are We Increasing Gender Equality? It's my pleasure to welcome you, Lindy. The floor is just for 8 minutes. I'm a timekeeper today. We need to be right on time. Thank you, Lindy.
Jackson, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. Good afternoon, everybody out there. It's good to see you again. Although the topic is a heavy one, it's good that we remain committed to the cause and to maintaining the dialogue on how we can improve our circumstance. I have been pondering a lot on what does progress really look like in this space. I mean, on the one hand, we recently saw a report released on the 8th of March 2022 by the South African Medical Research Council that was specifically talking about the prevalence of femicide and intimate partner violence. And that report talks to us about a reduction in rates of intimate partner violence and a reduction in femicide throughout the country. As you know, South Africa has a global rate of femicide that is 5 times the rate of the international averages. And so that is really a horrendous situation. And so when we saw this report telling us that femicide rates have reduced by almost a half, with the exception of the Eastern Cape, it's starting to show that the efforts of activists are starting to bear fruit. And yet our lived reality is very different. Our lived reality is different because every day we are reading about one more woman, one more young girl. We know that the prevalence of intimate partner violence continues to be high. And so, although perhaps women are not dying as much according to the report, certainly the rates of violence remain unacceptably high. It says to us we are very far from achieving our democratic ideals of a gender equality in this country. It is, of course, a global problem in South Africa, made even worse by the rates of poverty, made even worse recently by COVID and the lockdowns. During the lockdowns, we saw rates of violence against women, gender-based violence, increase as women were locked away with their perpetrators in their homes. And so we saw rates increasing at that time. We are also seeing quite a great deal of education and awareness on what gender-based violence is. I think that there are so many people who are awakened, firstly, to the reality, but secondly, and more importantly, to the fact that the shame is not the victims. The victim's only responsibility is to survive and take the journey into survival. But women are a lot more vocal, and I do want to thank our civil society movements who have really kept the shoulder at the wheel. The very existence of the organization that I represent, the Gender-Based Violence and Femicide Response Fund 1, is really the call to action of civil society to say enough is enough. And we know that in order to turn the tide of gender-based violence, we really, really need to resource the fight. Now, Tiki will know from a number of the forums that we are on as part of the NSP collaborative that there are a lot of women volunteering their time as part of this fight and part of making a reality of the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide. And yet it's coming at a cost. It is coming at a tremendous cost because a lot of these women are giving of their time from a volunteerism perspective. So on the one hand, you have women saying enough is enough, stop killing us, and women working very hard to solve the problem. In the process, because they're not remunerated for this work and not rewarded, it's another form of victimization. It's another form of entrenching the deep gender inequality. So I'm absolutely delighted that Tiki took our feedback on board after the last session and really invited our male allies here. We do know that there are a number of male allies out there. And in some ways, we really, really need to pick up the pace of men taking responsibility for this, because for all the women that are killed, the majority of women are killed by men. Of course, the statistic applies just as much to men. Men are killed mostly by men. So the problem of violence is with men. It is men that we need to step up and talk about this and talk to their compatriots, their colleagues in the spaces that they are most receptive to listening. Gender equality, are we starting to achieve? I can certainly say when we look at female representation in government, that is really high. Rwanda has also made a lot of progress over the last few years. And yet we continue to be seriously underrepresented in boardrooms, continue to be underrepresented in corporate as executives, with the result that women's jobs became 1.8 times more vulnerable over the COVID lockdown period. And so that shows us that women are not yet taking their rightful place in all these spaces. I am, however, heartened by the work of the Women's Economic Assembly, WICONA, under the auspices of the NSP Collaborative, as well as with the support and assistance of the International Women's Federation of South Africa, who have really pushed to ensure that women, from a regulatory perspective, will be entitled to 40% of procurement opportunities within government. And it is an agenda that we're wanting to drive into corporate SA as well. I do think that corporates have done a lot to contribute to the fight for gender equality. I think that the statistics that Tiki was highlighting right at the beginning bode well for us. The fact that the number of women chancellors and vice chancellors of the top universities in the country, it's an unprecedented level of women leadership and representation. And we are hoping that that's going to contribute to the change in universities. We are hoping that's going to contribute to the more progressive way that we expect universities to deal with the challenges of gender-based violence, whether it is sex for marks, and we've seen a scandal from one of the top universities recently. We've seen some really great work being done by the University of KwaZulu-Natal and the male leaders in that space, speaking up and speaking out against gender-based violence on their campuses. We've also seen some really, really difficult situations, women being killed on campuses in the Eastern Cape. And so it is a mixed bag. For all the progress that we make, I think for me, it is the fact that one case is one case too much. Every woman that is harmed, every woman that is killed sets the fight back years. And one of the things that concerns me as we continue to make inroads in the space is we are raising the next generation of leaders. We are raising the next generation of women leaders. We are raising young men into this violent culture. I saw a statistic recently that said the rate of violence, gender-based violence perpetrated by underage perpetrators has increased by 69% in the last year. I pause because that's a shocking statistic. It is saying for all the interventions that are aimed at driving behavioral change, that are aimed at driving social cohesion, that are aimed at dealing with toxic masculinity stereotypes, we are struggling to stem the tide and to protect our children from inheriting this violent nature. And so children are now learning this behavior, and violence begets violence. This is what we are seeing now. We're seeing too many young people, even in schools, perpetrating violence. And that is telling us that we continue to be a highly, highly violent society, and we need to tackle that from grassroots. We really, really need to deal with it from socialization. I am all for programs that deal with the young male child and how that male child is socialized. Now, in some feminist quarters, that is not acceptable, and that is perhaps an incorrect focus. But therein lies the nub of it. We're dealing with a wild and wicked problem, a pernicious problem, a pervasive problem, and there is no one solution aimed at dealing with one demographic that will turn the tide of this. We need to deal with victims and ensure they take the journey to being survivors, but we need to focus on prevention as well. I have sons, and I often think that there is no woman who raises her son to be a perpetrator. Where are we missing the mark? We need evidence-based solutions. We need a better understanding of the causalities around this, and this will drive better research-based and evidence-based action. But for now, I thank you all for the efforts that you are taking. I myself pledge to continue picking up these cudgels. I can confirm that the Gender-Based and Femicide Response Fund has contributed 69 million rand this year in the fight against the scourge. And this does include programs that are prevention programs aimed at young men and boys. The fight continues, and let's stay the course. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lindy, for that insightful keynote. Indeed, violence begets violence. If you look at every case of gender-based violence, try and look at the history of the perpetrator, you will see that that quote, that statement is absolutely true and correct. It doesn't just come from the blues. Thank you so much, Lindy. I hold my comments to the end of the second keynote. Our second keynote presenter is Titilope. Titilope has been at the forefront of positioning organizations for competitiveness for almost 2 decades now. Titilope is currently head sustainable development and corporate brand at Lafarge Africa PLC, where she's responsible for implementing its sustainability strategy and economic, environmental, social, and governance ambition. Thank you so much, Titilope, for creating this time to join us. Titilope will be talking about how can the private sector and academia work together to eradicate gender-based violence and increase gender equality. Really, for me, the academia doesn't work in isolation. In my alma mater at the University of Ibadan in Nigeria, we have what we call the gown-town relationship. So everything you're doing, what is the gown-town relationship? So today from the town, we have Titilope joining us, coming in from the private sector space. Thank you so much, Titilope. The floor is yours, and you have 10 minutes for your keynote. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackson, for the very warm introduction. And it's my pleasure to meet and see Lindy here again this morning. We were at the summit, the last summit in November. And it was quite a great time, sitting and sharing the stage with Lindy, having the same conversations and still really pursuing and pushing for gender equality, diversity, and inclusion. I believe where Lindy stopped is a great place to start. And it's important again that, when we talk about gender-based violence, we are talking about, what it means to us, the impact on us as societies across Africa, and the implications for some of our actions or inactions, as the case may be. The numbers do not look good for reading, honestly, and I know that there are various statistics to show forth what the situation is. World Bank says 35% of the women worldwide have experienced either physical and/or sexual intimate partner violence or non-partner sexual violence. 7% of them, across the world have been sexually assaulted by someone other than a partner. And as many as 38% of murders of women are committed by an intimate partner. And that is really, one, food for thought. And secondly, something to spur action, across, societies in Africa and with various stakeholder groups. And I'll share one more data with us. The Institute or International Journal for Environmental Research and Public Health states that the highest prevalence of intimate partner violence were reported included emotional violence at 29.4%, physical violence at 25.87%, and of course, sexual violence at about 18.75%. Now, what does this mean to us? And what does it tell us, as a continent looking towards, gender equality, gender diversity, and inclusion? For me, the real food for thought is, how do we even begin to discuss and implement some of the strategies that support the gender, such as equality and equity, diversity, inclusion, and all the associated matters related to it. For me, I'd like to liken it to a tripod that has 3 parts. So we cannot continue to have conversations around gender diversity, gender equality, gender equity, gender inclusion without, giving a force and a voice to the issue of gender-based violence. It is really important that we also continue to bring to the fore the impact of gender-based violence on the society. And, by doing this, it helps us to continue to have conversations such as this and begin to also understand what the implications are for us. Some of the things that we see, based on gender-based violence, maternal mortality is one critical issue. And something that looks, that huge. Imagine the multiplier effect on the society, where children are left at the mercy of the society. And of course, some of those things also have various implications. I believe that there is no gainsaying, for example, that, even when it comes to climate action related issues, women are the most impacted. So how do we now turn these things around to begin to chart pragmatic solutions, tailor-made solutions for respective societies across Nigeria, to be able to deliver and scale the kind of impact that we want, and that helps us to create that desired balance, talking about gender diversity and inclusion. One of the things that has given me a bit of comfort in the last couple of weeks is the fact that, we're having more conversations, one, but, internal, organizations are also putting this at the forefront. So, for example, one good news that I'd like to share with us is that when the United Nations Global Compact launched the Africa Strategy 2021 to 2023, one of the key priorities that was highlighted was to really lead and shape gender equality. And 2 ways that the Africa Strategy can help us to do that is to really drive, the private sector to develop family-friendly policies, whilst also ensuring that we're eliminating violence and harassment in all its, forms. I believe that this is a real good step in the right direction. And I believe that with all the stakeholders involved and having all hands on deck, we are already charting the right course. Because again, we cannot, afford to get weary. We cannot afford to get tired. We must do that which we want to do to be able to achieve the results that we desire. Now, how can the private sector and the academia work together to eradicate gender-based violence and increase gender equality? The society is really, really large, but there are critical stakeholders in the society that can support in driving value and impact. I believe that a stakeholder, a multi-stakeholder approach to tackling the scourge is very important, because again, gender diversity, gender-based violence has become a cankerworm that has eaten deep into the fabric of Africa. And it is important that you and I, understand our collective responsibility in driving, action that supports gender-based, that supports going against gender-based violence. How can, the private sector and academia work together? I have a few recommendations. One of the things that I believe that we have not fully embedded and entrenched, across societies in Africa is, the fact that, we need a constant curriculum update. And I say this with all, with all sincerity of purpose. We understand the role of education in societies and the impact that, being able to have discussions, bring to the consciousness of various people the impact of issues such as gender-based violence can have, in the short to medium to the long term. So I'll cite a practical example with Nigeria. There's a subject in primary and secondary school that I think is called civic education, and it speaks about civil responsibility, how we, want to be a responsible citizen, and in many cases, how we also want to be corporate, responsible corporate citizens. I believe that the academia and associate bodies like, the teaching institutes and all of that, have a critical role in constantly reviewing and updating, the curriculum to ensure that some of the social issues, are discussed at, the grassroots at the barest minimum, and, continue to, engage the various stakeholder groups. One of the things that, private sector organizations can do to support some of these things include to devise or design programs, programs that they can leverage through the curriculum updates to support awareness and action. We find that, in many of our CSR interventions, for example, we would focus on education as a whole, maybe numeracy, maybe, IT solutions, maybe literacy and all of that. But, some of these things, starting to have those conversations early enough would have a role, a role to play on the long run. I also believe that, in terms of working together with the academia, and I'm speaking to the private sector now, we need to expand the scope of gender-related issues. Beyond diversity, inclusion, and all of that, the private sector can support the academia with research funding in this area. And I believe that when we have the baseline data, we have all of the statistics, we can design more, more pragmatic, more tailor-made solutions that help us to deal with this scourge. Research is never ending, and that is the beauty of research. So I liked, for example, some of the statistics that Linda shared. And it goes to show that we can continue to measure, because when we do not do research, how do we even measure, how well or how not well we are doing with gender-based violence? So yes, I hope that this is a charge to private sector institutions, joining us this afternoon, that, it's something that we need to bring to the fore, of all of our, commitments to the economy at large. One other area that I believe is also, very important is partnership in policy formulation. And we cannot do much without policies, without frameworks, and without guiding principles that help us to state what the expectations are, what the resolutions are, what the obligations are, to continue to help us see an improvement, in the statistics that we are recording. There are various, national think tank groups across different, countries in Africa, and we need, they have, the climate action subcommittee, they have the social impact subcommittees, but are these committees also looking at things as important as gender-based violence? This is food for thought for all of us. And I believe that, we can make gender-based violence a key social performance indicator for societies across Africa, working with the academia. The private sector also needs to revisit the SDG 5, gender equality. And I'm saying this because many of us are proud to say we report, our social performance, we report our social indicators, but we report, a bit superficially. So we know that SDGs, all the 17 SDGs have targets and they have indicators. We need to do a bit more work, around reporting the targets and the indicators. And that is how we're able to drill down our impact in the real sense of the word, working with the academia. And finally, I believe that there are several opportunities in CSR that the private sector can implement. In Nigeria, for example, I do not know of any, home or institution that is supported by a private organization that is a home to help, gender-based violence victims. I do not know of any. And I believe that that is one area that, you know, the private sector can leverage, you know, a lot more in terms of helping, you know, victims survive, helping victims make, you know, very important decisions that, you know, impact their existence and help them to say it's either a yes or a no. And, you know, it's really a no. But again, we know that financial implications, capacity, and all of that determine whether women will stay in gender-based violent relationships or not. We also need a lot of reorientation programs. And I talk about reorientation programs from a grassroots localized point of view. How about having, you know, campaigns around gender-based violence, you know, in local languages, in major local languages, not English, you know, languages that resonate more with people and people can better understand, you know, the impact of this. I believe that that is important.
Thank you.
Okay, in just a minute, I'll wrap up. And
All right, you can cut it short, 30 seconds.
All right. And it is important, and it helps us to also better manage, you know, consequences. Consequence management is one tool that would help us, you know, manage gender-based violence issues as a whole. In conclusion, we all need to have all hands on deck. We want to eradicate, you know, gender-based violence. We want to foster gender equality. We must take a stand, not in saying, but in also doing, because it's not okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Titilokbe. What a way to end the keynote. It is absolutely not okay, and that is in sync with the It's Not Okay movement that Shared Value Africa initiative is implementing. And definitely, I completely agree with you. All hands must be on deck to really drive gender equality at all fronts. Thank you once again, Titilokbe. Yeah. Now, I had mentioned earlier that I am not the only moderator here, and in the spirit of gender equality, really to drive this conversation, I have my co-moderator that I told you earlier, and together we'll just debrief a few things from the keynote that has been shared, both that of Lindy and that of Titilokbe. So my co-moderator is already on your screen. You can see him. Hi, Andre. Good to see you. So Andre is the head of Department of Public Safety Management, where he manages a cluster, supports program development and review, and overall student support. He is a member of the South African Institute of Occupational Safety and Health. Welcome, Andre. Did I leave anything in your introduction? Hi. Yeah. So, Andre, can you hear me? Please confirm you can hear me, please.
Yeah, I can hear you now, Jackson. Can you hear me?
Great. I can hear you loud and clear. Thank you for joining us. I hope your day is coming up fine.
Yeah, I tell you what, Jackson, listening to our two previous speakers, it's a glooming subject that we're you know, touching on, and listening to all this statistics. What is shocking, and I don't know how out of date are these statistics that I have here, it says that 50% of assaults against women are done by someone closest to them. And 13% is a relative or a fellow household member, 15% intimate partner or spouse, and then 22% are a friend or an acquaintance. And I think this is shocking. And as we continue, you know, we will address this. And I think towards the end, I will just touch a little bit more on my view about GBVH.
Thank you so much, Andre. Yeah. So I had mentioned as well at the very beginning of this conversation, in the interest of time, I will not make so much comment on the keynote. I will put in a written comment for the report writing. So I will just proceed to the next segment, which has a large pool of speakers, really. Speakers drawn from East Africa, from West Africa, from Southern Africa as well. So really, I'll just go over their profiles so that we can steer the conversation in that direction. Andre, you're going to engage the first set of speakers in that order. after I've gone through their short profile. So on this four-man panel, the very first, we have Henry, we have Dr. Mumbi, we have Chiedza, we have Professor Cornell as well. So a quick profile of Henry. Henry is a senior fellow and a full-time faculty at Lagos Business School, the Pan-Atlantic University in Lagos, Nigeria. He is the academic director of the Global Chief Executive Program, run in collaboration with the Yale School of Management and Strathmore University in Nairobi, Kenya. Thank you so much, Henry, for joining us. I'll allow Andre to take you through some questions before I invite the next panelist. Andre, the floor is yours.
Hi, Henry.
Hi, Andre. How are you?
Fantastic. Let's first start off by, I'm going to ask you the question. What does the current Nigeria GBV awareness and landscape looks like?
Thank you very much, Andre. GBV comes in multiple forms: physical, psychological, and mental and emotional. I would like to focus on four aspects as it affects Nigeria. I'd like to focus on structural violence, physical violence, child marriage, and intimate partner violence. I'm afraid to report that the picture in Nigeria is not anywhere rosy. Structural violence is a term coined by Joan Galtung in 1969 that describes structural inequalities against the female gender perpetrated by the social structure and institutions. In Nigeria, for instance, Nigeria ranks 184 out of 192 countries in women's representations in national parliament. Out of the 469 national legislators in Nigeria, only 29 are women, against 440 men, just about 6%. Nigeria has 36 states, and we don't have a female state governor. We only have 2 female deputy governors. So these are signs of structural violence against women. Now let's go to the physical violence. The Nigerian Demographic and Health Survey report of 2018 states that 31% of women in Nigeria experience some form of physical violence from the age of 15. So that's about 3 in every 10 women. So that is a very disturbing statistics. Now, another form of GBV is child marriage. And I'm afraid, again, we don't have a good story on that in Nigeria. A lot of young girls between ages 15 and 19, teenagers, are married off early in their teenage years. According to the same report, 19% of women aged between 15 and 19 had begun childbearing. Actually, 37% of the 19-year-olds have started childbearing in Nigeria. The proportion of the teenagers that begin childbearing rises from about 2% at 15 years to 37% at 19 years. And it appears more prevalent in the rural areas than in the urban areas. And it also appears more prevalent in the northern parts of the country than in the southern and eastern parts. So that is something that we should be worried about. But let me anchor on something that perhaps nobody reports so much in Nigeria, and that's what is called intimate partner violence. And this refers to behaviors within an intimate relationship, boyfriend to girlfriend, husband to wife. This causes physical, psychological, sexual harm to those in the relationship. Now, many people do not report this type of violence, and the public gets to know only when it results in maybe death or suicide, as we've witnessed recently in Nigeria. Now, it comes from in the form of physical harm, like slapping, kicking somebody, or hitting somebody. It could be emotional abuse, such as insults, humiliation, or even, what we call controlling behaviors, isolating a person from his family and friends and all that. So it all comes in all these forms. But why do people not report this? Because of societal expectations. Women have been, made to believe that they must stay in the marriage no matter what happens. So what happens is that you don't get to know about these things until it gets to a stage of suicide or death. There's fear of retaliation. There's a lack of alternative means of economic support.
Sorry.
Yes.
Sorry, man, I have to cut you there. I'd just like to find out, I've got the following question. You've identified 4 types of violence.
Yes.
Which one would you rate the most serious one?
I will rate the intimate relationship violence. That's what I will rate. I rate most, because it is not reported, but it is all there in the society.
Why do you think it's not reported? Why do you think it doesn't get reported?
Yeah, so I was about saying that. So people do not report that. First, there's fear of retaliation. If you report that, the lady feels unsafe. And then because of structural violence, there is lack of alternative means of economic support. So if the lady leaves the relationship, maybe there is nothing to support her on. Then there is concern for the children. The lady is concerned about what happens to the children if she leaves the home. And then there's even lack of support from family and friends. They push her back to the home. Go and stay with your husband. You should be able to manage your home, And then there's also fear of loss of custody of the children, and maybe the lady is hoping that the man will turn around and begin to love her, and then the stigma from the society. So all this, make the lady stay in the relationship, gets all the beating, gets all the abuses, and then until it gets too late.
Thanks, Andrew. I've got one last question with one quick answer. We see that there's what you said, that it's not much reported on. How's this in Nigeria being addressed to get it reported?
So we had a recent case of a very popular musician that lost her life from this kind of intimate partner violence. And also it's beginning to create awareness. So the churches are beginning to preach that you don't need to stay in an abusive marriage. You need to report. So it's becoming, the society is becoming more aware of it. But it still has to do with the psyche, with the person involved, because some people don't just want to report. So it's about encouraging whoever is involved to speak out, and it's about the community, the church, and even the government, trying to do something about this to help get this thing out in the public. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Henry. Over to you, Jackson. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre, for that engaging conversation. Thank you so much, Henry, for sharing insights on the state of awareness in Nigeria. The next panelist I'll be bringing up is Dr. Give me a second. Yeah, Dr. Mumbi. I couldn't have forgotten your name so quickly. So Dr. Mumbi will be responding to some questions. Dr. Mumbi is a full-time accounting lecturer at Strathmore University Business School in Nairobi, Kenya. Good to see you, Dr. Mumbi. Teaching areas are financial reporting, forensic accounting, and the legal environment, and of course, corporate fraud, accounting theory, and sustainable finance. It's such a pleasure having you, Dr. Mumbi. And really, we just want to build up on Henry's submission, right? Wherein we know that there's a fear of reporting, there's a fear of shaming, the institutions to even help you post the violence aren't out there. That's the context in Nigeria. So now in Kenya, is there GBVH Kenya awareness and willingness to openly discuss? How are victims quite open to discuss and the general landscape? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jackson. And you know, good day, everybody joining from all over the continent. It's good to be here with you again. I think building up on what we've had from Henry, which are very insightful remarks, and now bringing it down here, I think it's just to note that the observations are very similar. There is, you know, in cases of gender-based violence and femicide, there is fear of retaliation, especially when it's an intimate partner, which, as we know, is in most cases. Actually, for Kenya, the recent statistics show that about half of women suffer this kind of violence at some point in their lifetimes. And I know we've talked a lot about the different statistics and so on, but let's also not forget the economics of it, that many times women are not in positions to leave that situation. And it is because perhaps they're not working. Sometimes culture and religion does make that a factor. Sometimes they are not empowered, even from the point of view of education. So as much as we're talking about access and we're looking at the 4th Sustainable Development Goal, we still know that there are many women, especially after COVID and in COVID-19, who did not access, you know, schools and have been left behind. And that again continues this, you know, vicious cycle again of abuse and violence. But I also, you know, I'm conscious of the time. I was just thinking, you know, of how to make this personal. Yeah. So I have 3 issues I wanted to bring out very quickly, which is understanding why women rise. There is a famous book, I think, written by 2 women on the same. How do women rise, especially in academic spaces, since this is actually an academic forum? And the second question was, who leads the charge when it comes to these conversations at the university level? So in Kenya, I feel that when I look at the statistics of UNESCO, I know in our environment, we are way lower. I've just seen, and Tiki Bernard shared that at the beginning, that 29% of research articles are authored by women. And I would say in Kenya, I'd be surprised if that is less, is more than 10%. So again, if we also look at leadership positions, deanships, associate or academic directors, we look at vice chancellor positions, deputy vice chancellors, the number is definitely much less than the one that the UNESCO has put forward. So then the question is, what should we do to increase the number of women in these positions, to increase the numbers of scholars that we see putting out very good research, like my colleagues, Professor Kone and others are doing, and we'll talk about later. Then the second aspect was to think about who leads the charge. So in Kenya, it is civil society organizations, as Lindy mentioned, who lead the charge in raising awareness around gender-based violence and femicide. But again, you know, as universities, we have a role, we have a responsibility to play. And in Strathmore, I find that actually it is our law school which is very active in this space. The law school has an institute for advanced studies in international crime justice, and they have a gender center. And there is where actually a lot of the advocacy goes on in the communities around us and within the city. So you find that they put together a database that brings together all the organizations that support women who have been exposed, subjected to violence. And then they also give special training to different investigators and prosecutors who are dealing in these cases. And that's a micro level example. But it's just to show that we need to constantly be asking ourselves these questions. How do women rise? And who should lead the charge? And then what role are universities playing? Because we will keep reading these statistics until we leave this earth, and they won't improve unless we do something very actively about it. I don't know if I still have more time to continue a little bit, Jackson, or if you want to pose a question. Just monitoring. Oh, good. I also just want to point out that we shouldn't undermine, because for me, the question around what form of violence is the most, I would say the one we need to look at. So I feel that of course, we need to look at the physical violence just because of the repercussions it has, obviously. But I also think I worry a lot about the emotional and the psychosocial effect that violence and abuse has on women, and whether we are actually tracking this and its impact on women over time reliably in our region, especially in East Africa. So I feel that's something we also shouldn't undermine, because it is not reported formally. Maybe it's just something that I'll mention to my friends. But then, the repercussions on my life and moving forward into other aspects of my life goals is something which I think can show up very tangibly and seriously. Back to you, Jackson. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mumbi. I mean, it's just clear that the landscape in Nigeria is not far different in terms of reporting. So we can see clearly, just like I can see comments in the chat box as well, the institution and the support frameworks for reporting and having this conversation is so low. All right, thank you. I'm not going to ask a follow-up question in the interest of time. So I'm going to bring in the next panelist, for which Andrea will engage our next panelist with a question. Our next panelist is Chieza. Chieza is a feminist and gender equality advocate, an educator, an occasional troublemaker whenever patriarchal structures are found. Chieza is the associate director of the Bachelor's in Entrepreneurial Leadership program at the African Leadership University, where I currently teach as well. Chieza, it's so nice to meet you. And over to you, Andre, for the question to Chieza.
Afternoon, Chieza.
Hi, Andre. Hi, Jackson.
Yes, I've noticed during the discussion this morning that we talked about all the role plays, and especially the young male children. Now, I see that there's a question about our young leaders and what are we doing to get them on how to manage GBVF. What is your perspective on this?
Okay. I would say I'm going to start off by just talking about, I think, where our young leaders end up being at risk. Okay, so hold on, let me just, excuse me, I am a little bit scratchy today. So I think that when it comes to our university campuses, our students are at risk, usually students who have previously been victimized in their homes or in their communities are at larger risk. We see that younger female students are usually at more risk than older female students. This mostly happens, of course, because they've just left home, they've come to a new country, in a new space, left their parents for the first time. So they usually end up being quite at risk. And then, of course, something else that exacerbates risk is gender and equitable attitudes and beliefs. So on our campus, we have students from, over 40 countries around the continent. So how do you then reconcile all these different cultures and countries and gender and equitable attitudes that students may have? Attitudes towards male superiority, attitudes towards male sexual entitlement. These attitudes exist, but we need to be able to build structures in which these attitudes are challenged over time. The other thing, of course, that puts our students at risk is alcohol and drug consumption. And this is something that we as institutions need to tread very lightly on, because it needs to never be something that is used to blame the survivor. So I would say something that is a big lesson that we have learned over time as an institution when it comes to protecting our young students, our young leaders from GBV, is in the response. So as much as we are, of course, working towards prevention, I think that when GBV does happen, our response is extremely important. And I think that where many institutions fall short is on providing survivor-centered response. So survivor-centered support and follow-up is so important, because there needs to be a balance between providing sufficient support and follow-up, and also ensuring the survivor's right to privacy, the survivor's right to be respected and protected. It's going to be difficult for us to continue to support survivors and to continue to ask survivors to come forward if in the process of them getting justice, they have to tell their story 10 times to different disciplinary boards and committees and all this. We need to be able to protect them. So we also don't want to have, I guess what is called like an institutional amnesia, where the case has been solved, the perpetrator has been, expelled and reported to the police or wherever it may be, and then we kind of just move on, and the institution moves on, and we expect the student, the survivor, to also move on. We need to understand that we need support in place for this student, because there are long-term consequences. Their academics will suffer in the long term. How are we going to support that? Someone who's a survivor, it takes a long time. Recovery is ongoing. So how do we support them? I think that as much as we are talking about prevention, it's also very important to talk about response, because our response, the way that we respond, shows other survivors how useful it is for them to report.
Thanks. Chetsa, also for the amount of time, I was just wondering if some of our other colleagues that's currently on the forum, if they are willing, I've got a question in, what about the survivor after the attack? And I've heard you talk about trauma. Are there any trauma support available to these guys, to these survivors?
Yeah, absolutely. So of course, this has to be on 2 tiers, right? So we have to have legislation and policies and appropriate, very robust survivor-centered campus support and response structures. So we need the policies in place. So on campus, this means like having a wellness team or counselors that are available to students, student representative councils that stand for student affairs, disciplinary committees for the perpetrator side, in terms of, especially in many universities where GBV happens between faculty and students, human resources, policies that are extremely robust that prevent GBV. And then we have to think about partnerships that our universities have off campus. So what is the relationship between our universities and rape crisis centers within our cities, our relationships with the police, our relationships with hospitals in terms of getting like rape kits and things like that available, getting off-campus counseling support. If a student is not comfortable with an in-campus counseling support, we should have mechanisms in place that we could have referral systems for off-campus support. Yeah, those are, I would say, on-campus and off-campus both. We need to have that support.
Thanks. I'm handing back to you, Jackson.
Thank you, Andre. Thanks, Sheza, for sharing those insights. I completely agree with you with respect to the structure of our disciplinary committee, the option to have on-campus and off-campus support. I mean, even as a member of disciplinary committee in my university, I will agree with you that one of those days I left with secondary trauma, and that was really, really, really painful to hear this story over and over again. And the person had to go over and keep saying things about, gender-based violence. So I'll move quickly. Thanks, Jeza. I'll move quickly to our last member of this Q&A before I call on another group of panelists who will be making just contributions and comments based on what has happened last year, right? And this year, so what has changed. So, but before I call on that panel group, the last but not the least on this Q&A is Professor Delaine. Professor Delaine is an associate professor in the Department of Strategic Communication at the University of Johannesburg, where she specializes in experiential learning for strategic communication students, activism, community influencers, network theory, internal communication, and leadership. Really, we need to hear Prof talk about how communication can contribute, because really what I'm seeing from the comments and the response from Nigeria, from Kenya, right? There is no effective communication strategy. There is no framework. So Prof, so good to have you on the panel. So my question straight to the point is, how can communication contribute to shift the dial on gender-based violence and femicide? Over to you, Prof.
Lovely. Thank you, Jackson. Yes, it is a tall order. It's something quite difficult to answer in one few minutes or in 4 minutes, as we have. Jackson, in my preparation, I asked this critical question for myself. And given, you know, the sentiments this morning already shared, or this afternoon already shared by our various participants and colleagues all over the continent, which is to me amazing to be sharing, and that's one benefit of technology. Sharing all these wonderful ideas, I also picked up from what you said, Jackson, that we need action. There's all these statistics all the time, and the same goes then for communication. You know, in our communication industry, you know, it's so easy to talk a lot, and little action actually comes from all the talking. And you know, Corné and myself are working very hard to find a lot of research. But again, it is research that's going to be published somewhere, and that is not really developing a lot of strategies and a lot of action. So in my opinion, one of the key issues that we need to look at from a communication point of view is the 3 tiers, in my opinion, that really strengthens communication is enough dialogue and places where we can actually share stories. And we have shared a lot of stats this morning. I'm missing some real heartfelt stories, which I'm sure has access to when we start talking about the deeper meaning of gender equality, people finding their feet after and surviving gender-based violence and finding a new purpose in life. So where do we share those stories, and what are the various connectivity that we have, the interconnectedness that we demonstrate through our stories and the various platforms that we have? So to me, networks are extremely important, where we look at the benefit, the multilateral benefit that we can find through networks with the various people that we are representing, the various stakeholders that we are representing. What are the public opinion and the greater good of what we are doing? So how are we actually delivering that? And then what are the relationships between the different communicative entities and equations, the publics, the relationships, and the issues, and in this case, GBV. So my answer to your question as the role of communication is where and how actively are we putting measures in place to actually adhere to dialogue, relationships, and then the connection between the interconnectivity between all of this. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Delane. Very insightful response there. I mean, I appreciate how that you had to compress all of your thoughts into that summary of putting in place measures to ensure that you know, communications take place. So really, this is the end of this Q&A discussion. Prof, I'm not going to ask you a follow-up question because we're really running out of time now, and we have some amazing persons that need to speak. So where are things, right? Most of these persons were here last year. So we want to hear from their institution, right? Comments generally from earlier speakers. Where are things and where are we going? So, but before we move quickly, I see a comment, or it's a question by Simon. Say, what are your plans of onboarding women's rights revolution into Web3 and the metaverse? In Europe, women are embracing it to achieve freedom. I stand to be corrected, Simon Minor, but I really think data is going to drive, the world of metaverse and Web3, and how best are we collecting those data? What sort of communication frameworks do we have? So it's something around the use of technology. And I can tell you at the moment, in my institution, students are developing an interface called SafeView, right? It's really towards reporting and putting in those data points, which I believe from there, we can talk about moving those, data insights and structures. So if we can build in place systems and processes that will enable us to fetch data, which is really difficult to get, especially using technology, I think this can really get us going into incorporating stuff in the metaverse and Web3. So really, let me go quickly now. This is about 16 minutes to the end of this interesting conversation. I don't want to stop, but I have to stop in the interest of time. So I want to run a quick introduction of the persons who will be reacting to some of the submissions made in 2 minutes, really, and telling us where are things in their respective institutions of learning. So on that panel, on that individual list, we have Professor Cornell Davis. Cornell Davis is an associate professor in the Department of Strategic Communication at the University of Johannesburg. We also have Dr. Olebokeng Salebi, who is also a senior lecturer from the Department of Business Management at the University of Pretoria. Her research interest really is around multi-stakeholder partnerships in achieving business and development objectives. We also have Dr. Hilingiwe, who is also a senior lecturer at Wits School of Governance at the University of Wits. And the last but not the least in that set of individuals is Dina Jonka, who currently lectures as a senior lecturer in the School of Criminal Justice in the College of Law at the University of South Africa, UNISA. So really, I'm going to be allowing you guys to make comments in 2 minutes, starting with Professor Cornell. Cornell, you have 2 minutes. I can be magnanimous to give you 2.5. So please go ahead and share insights based on all the conversation we've had now, and where are things generally at your institution. Thank you.
The conversation we're having is encouraging as it is, because we're engaging with each other. I know we have got very short time, so I can just say we've collaborated very successfully with Shared Value Africa Initiative. We are about to launch a groundbreaking research report that we have done on gender-based violence involving the private sector and employees in the private sector. So we are very excited about the upcoming report. It's first of its kind globally. And yes, we are actively involved. UJ is actively involved. We have got a transformation unit who deal with gender-based violence, and watch out for the news. I will allow my other colleagues to speak and if there's any questions, I will gladly answer.
Thank you, Cornell. Over to you, Hilingiwe, 2 minutes.
Thank you so much. Quite interesting ideas and contributions. So I've moved the institutions 3 times since our last meeting. So I'm commenting very briefly, responding to what other colleagues have said in relation to what is happening on the ground. And for me, 2 things stand out from the comments that have been made so far and from the kind of activism that we've been doing. So for the longest time, research has been pointing out to the gap, pointing out to the problem of lack of resources for women as the reason why they continue to stay in abusive relationship. But recent cases, they've shown us that even in cases where women, they are self-sustainable and they have their own resources, they continue to be killed by their partners whenever they attempt to leave. And the case at point is Namhlam Twa's recent case. But what is important is the way forward in terms of what we do as academics, as activists on the ground. And the case of Zainab, a Nigerian young woman who was sexually assaulted at a hotel, recently this month has told me in terms of speaking beyond the hashtag, because on one end there was a hashtag that was supporting her, I believe her, but how different activists came together from academic spaces, from NGOs and all over the spaces to come together to create a space that was called Hotels Black Women Community, where people came together to try and think about ways of thinking through safety when Black women are traveling and sharing resources in terms of what is to be done, but also blacklisting those spaces that have been dangerous for women. So I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you so much, Hilengiwe. Interesting insights there. And it's interesting to know that within the last 4 years, you've moved across 3 institutions, lots of development and changes there. Andre, you have a follow-up question. I can give you a minute. Otherwise, I can call an Oliver Kang. Andre?
Yeah, Jackson, I've heard during this session a lot on reporting. And, from my background, is and what I've experienced is reporting, especially at our police stations. I think that's a serious problem and it needs to be addressed. And it brings me back to the question of how many of those officers that sitting in that office has been trained to deal with a GBV victim. I think that is a serious problem. And then it brings me back to that the battered women syndrome. I think that should be addressed. I think it may be, Prof. Corneille, in your report, maybe it's been addressed, to tell women, you know what, it's time to stand up, come forward. And I hear, and I've heard you also about the fear. And I think it links directly to the psychological fear. What I'm going to do. We've heard that some of these people, when they come out, there's no support. Where do they go? I can talk, of experience. You try and go and have a look and see some of these safe houses, especially directly after the incident. You see a lot of names. Have we ever visited it? I was involved in trying to establish a domestic violence unit in where I used to work, and that's an eye-opener to see what's going on. And it's serious.
Thank you, Andre. It's a lot of work that needs to be done, especially in capacity building of these individuals you're mentioning. Thank you so much, Oliver Kang, for joining us. I hope I called your name correctly. So over to you. What's the landscape like? I mean, so far we've been having lots of conversations, speakers upon speakers. In 2 minutes, your takeaway and where are things generally in your space? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I think for me, the most important thing is the conversation on curriculum transformation, because currently I'm part of the Center for the Future of Work at the University of Pretoria, and we look at what the future of work will look like in general. And one of the most important things is the role of gender egalitarianism in the workplace. That's one of the things that's coming to the fore a lot. And that's also part of some of the research that we are doing on how do we create more egalitarian workplaces, and how do we also create a curriculum that includes conversations on gender equality, regardless of whether a student is an economist or an engineer, whatever. We all have to be educated on issues of gender equality. So that's something that's coming to the fore a lot. And I just want to just link this to a paper, or actually it was an opinion piece that was written by Professor Jenny Hubler here at the university. And, one of the things that she talked about is, as much as we talk about how COVID has had a negative effect on gender relations, there have also been some positive things for gender relations that have come as a result of COVID. And one of those things for me was, for instance, sitting in a meeting like this, because people had to work from home, and we'd be sitting in a meeting like this, and I'd have a meeting with a male colleague, and you'd hear children crying in the background and screaming for their father's attention, right? All of that kind of created the perception that childcare and home life, or the work that happens in the home, is not a purely female thing. I remember, again, I had a meeting with a male colleague, and he had his new baby boy son on his chest during a meeting, right? So as much as we used to have the perception that, you know, the work in the home as women would have to do pretty much two jobs, right? You'd do the work out in the world, and then you'd come home and work in the home as well. So the perception was that, you know, work in the home was for females. And I think that COVID, because people had to work from home, it kind of has played a role in shifting that perception. So I think we need to talk a lot about that imagery, the perception that we have of, you know, what is important work, that work in the home is also important, and women who work in the home should not be perceived as less than, you know, just because she's not out in the workplace. But I think organizations have a lot of work to do in creating an egalitarian workplace. We need to also have more conversations about giving men paternity leave, right? That's emphasizing that point, because it creates a more egalitarian workplace, and it changes the perception of women in the workplace. So changing the appearance or the perception of men in the workplace will have a positive impact as well on women in the workplace. So I think that's something that also is coming to the fore a lot more. But thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. Fantastic submission there. And I tell you, look out for the reports that will come up as an offshoot of this conference. That will be well captured. Thanks again, Ole. The last but not the least on this round of comments is Dina Jonka. Dina, if you're with us, feel free to unmute. Dina had already mentioned she's got a problem, a technical glitch with her camera. So you may not be able to see her, but she's got something to say. Dina?
Good day, everyone. Oh, it's so interesting to hear everyone talking. Yeah, I can start at UNISA. We've got a few projects going on. I think, as all of you know as well, our principal and vice chancellor is also a lady, Professor Lenka Bula, and she's very, one of her niche areas is gender-based violence research. So currently at this stage, 2 colleges at UNISA are really working, doing a lot of work in the field of gender-based violence and gender equality. The one is my college, where we are looking at gender equality as a constitutional right, and then also crimes. The victim as well as the offender. In my school, there's a lot of people researching, doing research. Some of our students are doing research in prisons. So yeah, the scope is there a lot. Then also in the College of Human Sciences, we have an Institute for Gender Studies, where they also do research, a lot of community projects, and then also working on policies towards GBV and gender equality. And they also say that to eliminate GBV and the discriminating against women in the workplace, that is one of their goals. And if you educate people about gender, you can also achieve gender equality and you empower women. And then I think what came out also in this discussion today is, yes, we can empower women, but we must not forget about the men. How, you know, they also have to make that mind change. And then one of the projects that was now starting in March in KZN from one of our from the wellness people there is they took UNISA, the UNISA name, and they had a pledge there to eradicate all forms of gender-based violence. And it was given to the students as well as the people working here at UNISA. And the U, they say, stands for unite. We all unite together. The N is to notify, they motivate people to notify the authorities. If you experience GBV, then notify people. And I think the more people are talking or going to police station and report it, the more people will start with that. The I is for inspire or influence people and motivate them to start talking about it. The S is for supporting of victims. We do support the victims, and then also we need to link, I think at all universities, we need to link up with our NGOs and our people outside that can assist us, because we cannot do all the counseling and so on. We just don't have the manpower to do that. And I also think we are not also skilled always do that. So we need to work with people like TIERS, like all these organizations that can assist us also to refer our students. And then also the last one is to act swiftly. So yeah, the sooner you report these things, the sooner they can investigate. And just another thing that I want to mention here, the Indies, we are all talking about all these nice things that this university are doing, that organization are doing, but I think there's still a lack for me in interacting with each other. Say, for instance, we are having our projects, UJ having their projects, VETS having their projects. But in the end, it will be nice if we can all get together and see how can we assist each other, as well as maybe we can be stronger when we work together. Yeah, that's all from my side. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Zina. Insightful comments there. There has to be a platform for collaboration, so we don't work in silos, and that way you have a lot of impact for the work we are all doing. At this point, we are really winding down to the end of this conversation. I want to sincerely thank our panelists who shared comments and takeaway. And really, if you can, just tap an emoji there to show an appreciation, a digital clap or anything to Ole, to Connect, to Lingiwe, to Dina, and to every other person who had made a statement or had made contributions prior to now. Andre, in 1 minute, your takeaway from all of this conversation before I hand over to Rio.
Thanks, Jackson. Yeah, I just want to say thank you for this opportunity, a real eye-opener to see what is happening. I'm Prof. Kona, I'm looking forward to that report, see what's going on in it. And I would also love to distribute it amongst our own colleagues here at my institution, especially the outcomes of that report. And then, Jackson, what I've realized is we have to take hands. This is not a system that works in silos. And, we need to propagate this. As, I think, yeah, we definitely have to go more public with this and say, stop. Because I've heard a lot about gender violence on male, female, but I would just like, I haven't seen any statistics on same gender violence. I think that is a problem. I can talk of experience, and believe me, I had a family member, and that is really as serious as it is male and female. It is same gender as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. Thank you so much, everybody, for staying on. This is 3 o'clock on the dot Central African time. And really, we just want to take the closing remarks from the Executive Director of Shared Value Africa Initiative. So permit me to invite Vuyo to give us some closing remarks and the way forward as we end this call today. Vuyo, the floor is yours. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jackson. Thank you, Andre. I think Tiki will agree with me that it was a well-made decision, right? To have the two of you leading our session today. Really kind of like rounding that loop on the conversation on the role men can play on not just supporting the fight against gender-based violence, but really ultimately leading it on other platforms, as Lindy said in her opening remarks today. So I think for us as a Shared Value Africa Initiative, as Dina said when she was closing off as well, it's quite important to have conversations, to have spaces where we, across sectors, across societies, across border, can not only learn from each other, but also see how we can collaborate towards the solutions that we all want for our collective community and society. So, as the SVI, I'm very proud and I'm happy to have had today's discussion as a follow-up to the one that took place in August. And we are going to also be releasing a report after this that kind of like rounds off what the conversation was about, but hopefully also points out the recommendations that, in terms of what everyone is doing and what more can be done by academia. But of course, now the added step of bringing in civil society as well as the private sector, and how together we can have greater collective impact in fighting gender-based violence and also addressing gender equality in our societies across the board. And really everyone has a role to play, from pledging or committing, researching, and ultimately taking action, right? And measuring the action. And, I think it was said very well where there's a difference between the lived reality and the statistics that we see sometimes that can seem quite removed from us. But I think the more we, create platforms and engage around what this actually means in a more tangible way, we can also look at what the outcomes, what we think will be felt in a much better way within our families, within our societies, and within on campuses as well. So having said that, we had various solutions that everyone really spoke about, from reporting justice system to supporting victims, survivors after the fact. But ultimately it's about what can we do together that has that greater impact. And we as the SVAI, in our partnership with UJ, will be releasing the report that Prof. Corne mentioned, and we're going to be reaching out to everyone here when that happens to be able to hear more about how the outcomes have been of that research that we've been doing since last year. And beyond that, I think I just want to wrap up saying thank you to all our panelists. We had 13 speakers today, guys. Not a lot of time, but I think we covered a lot of ground in terms of just hearing the perspectives from Eastwards and Southern Africa as to what we can do here. And we look forward to really having more engagement, not just engagement, but action, to actually look at what impact we can make as a collective in addressing these very important issues. Having said that, I want to close off today and say that we are going to be sending the recording. Please share far and wide to those you think can benefit from having, from listening to that. And we look forward to connecting with you again in future. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brad.
Thank you. Bye-bye, colleagues.
Sawa.